Yeah.
So I'll try it out. Cool. Sweet.
Oh, we got another one. Hey, it's Ben.
Hey, Ben. Oh, you're muted, Ben. Does anyone, can anyone recap kind of what we went through last week? And by last week, I mean like a month ago or whatever. Anyone remember what we were talking about?
How? Oh, what was it?
Evil and suffering.
Evil and
Yeah,
suffering. Yeah, we
pretty
talked about
much.
evil and suffering.
Has to be a lawgiver or someone to be in authority for right and wrong to exist.
Right.
Something that we talked
Yeah. So for those that are just kind of joining or whatever, we'll give a bit of a recap. So like from September, we kind of talked through the resurrection, a bit of evidence for the resurrection. Throughout this series, I'm trying to use basically only atheist quotes and evidence and stuff like that to give it as possible unbiased as I can. And we looked at a guy named Bart Ehrman and basically his arguments for kind of Jesus, the historical Jesus. But then we took it a bit further and said, based on this evidence, the fact that there was an empty tomb, these appearances, that there was so many that it's probably not hallucination. And even if it was hallucination, you can't explain the empty tomb without having multiple theories that aren't really backed by historical evidence. We looked at the reliability of the Bible a little bit. And then last time we came together, we looked at the problem of evil and suffering. And how Christianity really has probably the best answer for the question of evil and suffering. We kind of looked at the flip side. We looked at atheism. And we even looked at atheists who are now kind of questioning their own faith in atheism because of how it just can't answer the problem of evil and suffering. And how, this guy named Alex Rosenberg wrote a book called The Atheist Guide to Reality. Basically, in his book, he's advocating that the implications of atheism eventually lead to the fact that there's no purpose, there's no God, no afterlife, but also no free will and no morality, no objective moral standard. And we'll kind of go into why in a bit later when we kind of look at kind of some of the philosophical or logical reasoning for that. And we'll kind of see it a bit today. We're kind of going to take a bit of a new direction, though. We're going to sideline kind of the philosophical and logical and historical data and stuff like that. We're going to kind of look strictly at science for the next, I don't know how many weeks it'll take, but I was hoping to get through a lot more today than what we will get through. So it might be a while, but I think it'll be helpful. Plato said there are two things that lead men to believe in God: the argument of the existence of a soul and the argument of the motion of the stars. So Plato wasn't a Christian, he was a Greek philosopher. But he was basically saying this. In other words, there are kind of two things that bring people to kind of start questioning the existence of God and, is there a God out there? The fact that there's a universe that's super massive, and then also just the fact that we're individuals. We'll look at atheism in a bit, but atheism can't actually account for the fact that we're individuals. Human consciousness is the biggest kind of question mark for atheism right now. They can't explain consciousness. They can't explain DNA. They can't explain what we're going to talk about today, which is kind of the Big Bang. And what we're going to kind of do in this science series or whatever is we're going to go from Big Bang basically all the way to humanity. We're going to kind of track, okay, what big things in science are there? Does science point towards a God, or does it point towards there not needing to be a God? And I'm going to argue based on the data that we're going to kind of look at that it all just screams that there's a God that is just weaving things together. We're going to go from Big Bang to kind of like the fine-tuning of everything, and we'll discuss a bit more of that next time. And then we'll go into DNA and then the soul. And it should be fun. For me, this was like, I'm going to pose a question. Why why should we study science? Like, do we really need to study science or any of that? What are your opinions? Should we?
So we could ask more questions.
Yeah,
Discover
ask
more.
more questions. I know a lot of people who don't think it's really necessary to have answers for science and stuff like that. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
More evidence.
Yeah.
So it could be relevant to like the whole society.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can,
Research.
I guess, so you could find more proof for when you're talking to somebody about it who gives you about science.
Yeah, totally. And I'm just gonna kind of reiterate something that we kind of said at the beginning. But when we're kind of like learning this stuff, it's honestly more for you guys to be encouraged in your faith and strengthened. It's gonna be answers for people asking honest questions. But what we're gonna look at is not for just being right. One of my favorite quotes of all time. I don't actually know who said it, but it was, "To be right in the wrong way is to be wrong." And if you look through the New Testament and through what Jesus said, it's like that was basically what he was saying to the Pharisees the whole time. You guys are right, but you're wrong because you're doing it all in the wrong way. I think it's 1 Peter. I forget the verse, but Peter basically says to always give reason for the hope that we have. So that's what we're doing, is we're just saying, hey, we have this hope, we have this faith, but it's also grounded in reason. For me, I remember becoming a Christian and then just being so scared to actually look into science and all this. I actually just read a book by Richard Dawkins called The God Delusion. And for years, I was just scared to like read atheist books and stuff because I'm like, oh man, what if they like disprove God or whatever? But the more I actually delve into science, the more I delve into the historical accuracy of the resurrection, the more I delve into philosophy and logic, everything seems to actually give more evidence for the fact that no, God actually did create the world and he did come down in the person of Jesus Christ. I remember specifically, this is kind of funny, but some of my deepest moments of worship or awe of God are learning about science. Like even just preparing this week, my mind was just like blown at all the stuff I was like learning and all these stuff that these atheist scientists were coming up with. Just like screamed at me like, oh my goodness, this all points to, even atheists themselves are sometimes saying this just screams of Genesis. There's I don't remember his name, but he's a Japanese scientist, and he was basically saying that the Big Bang points to Genesis, and he's referring to the Bible, Genesis 1, the fact that in the beginning there was God, and then he created the heavens and the earth. There was this moment on a ferry I remember where I was studying DNA and I just started like crying. I was reading this book on DNA and just how DNA works just made me start crying. Just kind of how it just screamed of the fact that, of God's existence. And like that verse in the Bible, like we've been knit in the mother's womb. What has your guys' experience been with science and questions around Big Bang, evolution, human consciousness, and stuff like that? Have you guys discussed it much outside of high school or?
We talked about Big Bang Theory a bit in my science class in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the teachers were kind of afraid, or if they were not allowed to talk about religion, they just always would put it as a big. Right. They would never question or even bring up the religion.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be like, so like from the Big Bang, the DNA and like has been doing this and reproducing. Doing that. And they would never question anything other than the Big Bang.
Right. When you guys hear the word like Big Bang, what kind of comes to mind? What words are associated with that in your head?
Science.
Science. Yeah, science.
Darwinism.
Darwinism. Yeah.
Darwin was that famous atheist, right?
He's basically the guy that started the evolutionary theory.
Oh, right.
Really made it popular.
Yeah. I'm not thinking straight.
Oh, that's fine.
It's a long day.
Yeah, I actually find it really ironic because even me, like when I think of the word Big Bang, like there's all this kind of cultural stuff attached to it. Or even you look at Big Bang Theory, Sheldon, like the smart dude, doesn't need God. But it's almost backwards when we come to look at it historically. Historically, the Big Bang Theory was actually totally rejected when it was first proposed. Can someone define like the Big Bang Theory, or just like in a very simple way?
There was nothing, and then, well, there was only chemicals, right, floating. And then two of them apparently met and just caused a bang, apparently.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Basically,
The universe is like expanding
yeah.
from that point onwards.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But very slowly. It's not like it wasn't like it's like an explosion.
Yeah.
Explanation of how the universe began, basically.
Began, yeah, very simple. That's kind of what I was looking for. Just the universe began. The theory that the universe actually had a beginning. And obviously, like that. What's kind of crazy historically is that for years and years, that wasn't the case. Does anyone know what they believed before the Big Bang Theory? Like the Big Bang Theory is only from the 1900s, so it's only 100 years old.
They just believed in idols. Gods, is that what you mean?
Gods, sure.
Like,
But as far as the universe, what did they think about the universe?
Oh, we didn't know much about it. I thought it was. I think was it Galileo?
Yeah.
Wasn't he like put in prison or something like that because of his rejection of either he discovered something?
Mm-hmm.
Was he the guy that made the telescope?
I'm not quite sure. I
Anyways.
think Galileo, was.
He was like rejecting the flat Earth theory. I think.
Yeah,
Oh,
something
yeah.
like
That's what I
that.
was trying to say.
I think it actually might be the fact that the Earth wasn't the center. I think is what he was
Right,
rejecting, because that was a Aristotle idea. But basically, what they believed was just that the universe always existed. So for years, Christianity was really the one that looked like it was against science, because from the beginning we believed that the universe didn't always exist. That in the beginning was God, and then God created the universe. And there's some pretty crazy ways that apologists and stuff would come up with these mathematical equations to prove that there actually was a beginning, because science at that point didn't really support the Bible. It didn't support that there was a beginning. So they came up with these crazy math equations and stuff to mathematically prove that there was a beginning, and everyone just thought these were terrible arguments. And then in 1927, this guy named George, I'm going to butcher this, Lametart, anyways, whatever, George the priest, we'll call him George the priest. He was a Roman Catholic priest, or Roman Catholic, and he proposed the idea of the Big Bang, basically. And of course, coming from a priest proposing the Big Bang, it was rejected initially. This is what J.M. Wersinger says. He's an atheist. He says, the Big Bang Theory seemed to give the Judeo-Christian idea of a beginning of the world, and it also seemed to have a call for an act of supernatural creation. It took time, observational evidence, and careful verification of predictions made by the Big Bang model to convince the scientific community to accept the idea of a cosmic genesis, a successful model that imposed itself on the reluctant scientific community. So basically what he's saying is that it took a while for the Big Bang Theory to really catch on. Even as they started getting evidence for it, it really took a while for it to catch on. I think in a lot of the times we think science and faith are kind of at odds. That's not the case. That's actually it was an idea that was proposed by two guys that's kind of been rejected. But I think that has kind of seeped its way into our culture where we think science is always at odds with faith. But historically, Christians were actually the ones who basically started the big scientific revolution. Do you guys know who Sir Isaac Newton is?
Yeah.
He was a Christian. Galileo was part of the church, even though he got imprisoned by the church and stuff. He was part of the church. A lot of these guys that came up with huge findings in science were all Christians, and even atheists will acknowledge that a lot of what we know today is thanks to Christians, because they believed that the world was reliable, because there was a God that was reliable, and there was a God that wanted to be known, and he'd made himself known through creation. So yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. We're gonna kind of go through this argument. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. It was actually designed by a Muslim, but it's been made popular in recent years by William Lane Craig. It's everything that begins must have a cause. Does everyone agree with that? Everything that begins must have a cause? Generally. So everything that begins must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That's how the argument goes. Logically, it's airtight. And even atheists will say that, yeah, logically that is airtight if you could prove that. So something had to be eternal. So when we say that everything that begins to exist has a cause, it's like that. Have you guys ever been around like a 4-year-old that just keeps asking why or how? And eventually you get like way back. It started with like, well, why did they make ketchup? And then you somehow get to like some random topic because it just digresses so far. Am I the only one who's?
No, I've been
yeah.
there.
So, but like as a kid, you're kind of trying to figure this out. Like, hey, where did everything come from? Because logically, you could keep asking that question, and then you eventually get to the point of, okay, the beginning of the universe. You eventually get to the point of, okay, at some point, something started everything. And so atheists and Christians alike are saying, okay, what was that thing in the beginning that started everything? And so I'm just going to go through a bit of the history on like some evidence for the Big Bang Theory. So when we talk about the Big Bang Theory, don't be scared, because it's actually, if we believe that there's a God who's actually created the world, and he has, like early Christians thought, created a reliability with laws that we could test, even like find ways to him through science. There's a ton of people right now in the scientific community becoming Christians, or even just ditching their idea of atheism because their science is actually leading them to faith in a God of some sort because of just how crazy it is. So, okay, 1824, second law of some of this might be dry, but it's pretty important. The second law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred or transformed. So there's this, it's basically saying that matter can't just pop into existence, that the universe is this closed system, in a sense, where energy and matter are in the universe. You can't just have matter popping into existence and energy just popping into existence, that it had to come from somewhere. So starting with that law, these people started to develop theories. Vesto Slipher discovered the, what's it called? The red light shift, the Doppler shift. Have you guys ever heard of the red light shift? So basically he looked into the sky and the stars emit light, but they're light years away. So it takes some time for the light to get to us. And he was looking into the sky and he's like, oh, the stars actually appear to be farther away than predicted. So they kind of noted that and called it the Doppler shift. Around that time, Einstein proposed a theory of general relativity. And I won't go into that because it's a pretty crazy theory on how to make two concepts that seem like they're at odds basically make sense. But in this theory, all his equations would only balance if the universe was either contracting or expanding. The only way to make sense of it was if the universe was either contracting or expanding. So at that time, he noted that, okay, maybe the universe is expanding. If for all my equations to work, the universe has to be expanding. It can't be eternal. He was trying to, he was actually, in his quest, he was trying to prove that the universe was static, that it kind of always existed. And every time he would plug in something, it would basically, the universe just wouldn't work out. His equations wouldn't work out. So the only way they would work is if he predicted an expanding universe. At that time, they didn't really have much evidence for that except just his prediction until 1927, when you guys might know this name from high school, Edwin Hubble and his telescope. So basically, they noted the first guy's findings, and then in Edwin Hubble's telescope, which was a bit more advanced, discovered the red light shift and noted that the stars were moving even farther away. And they're moving in a way that's kind of hard to explain. They're like moving away from each other. It's like space itself is actually expanding. So this was really giving a lot of momentum for the Big Bang Theory. But there was still quite a few people who rejected it. One scientist named Fred Hoyle said the reason why scientists like Big Bang is because they are overshadowed by the Book of Genesis. It is deep within the psyche of most scientists to believe in the first page of Genesis. So it's this guy who he was just really, he did not want to believe that, like, the Bible is true. And he saw the logical conclusions of saying that the universe began to exist. So he started to come up with this theory called the static state theory. And basically what he was saying is, okay, it may appear like things are expanding, but that's because there's these mini bangs all over the place. But it was crazy because in 1940, these guys predicted that there would be this background radiation. If the Big Bang actually happened, there'd be this frequency in space that was around the same frequency as radio waves. At that point, it was just a theory. They're like, hey, if this theory is true, we have to find this. 15 years later, this guy named Arno Penzias and a colleague of his discovered this frequency in space. And it's called the cosmic background radiation. So when they discovered that, it was basically the nail in the coffin for the static state theory and all other theories alike that propose that the universe always existed. Today, there's virtually no scientist that claims that the universe always existed. That kind of draws to, okay, what created the universe? It's kind of crazy. Do you guys know who Stephen Hawking is?
Yeah.
He's a super intelligent guy. He's in a wheelchair. He has I forget what it's called, but basically his whole body slowly.
ALS.
Was it ALS?
It was ALS.
Okay, so basically his body slowly deteriorated from the time he was a kid until the point where he couldn't talk. He would basically use his fingers to talk somehow. I don't even know how they did that, but he was brilliant. But he was an atheist. But he was trying to write a book on the origins of the universe. And he actually says a couple crazy quotes. I don't know. No, I didn't write them all down. But he said, it's difficult to discuss the beginning of the universe without mentioning the concept of God. My work on the origin of the universe is on the borderline between science and religion, but I try to stay on the scientific side of the border. It is quite possible that God acts in ways that cannot be described by scientific laws. So this guy who's basically been an atheist his whole life goes to write this book on the origins of the universe, and is saying, he even says in another part of his book that there are religious implications to his findings. Over and over again, we see quotes like that. John Leslie said, this guy's not a Christian, he said, the fine-tuning argument presents us with a choice between at most two possibilities. The first is that God is real. The only way to avoid that conclusion is to believe in the so-called many worlds or multiverse hypothesis, which postulates the simultaneous existence of many, possibly infinitely many, parallel universes in which almost anything theoretically possible will ultimately be actualized, so that there is nothing surprising in the existence of a universe like ours.
Wait, that was Stephen Hawking came up with the multi-universe?
No, so basically this is the only other theory out there. It's either a multiverse theory or it's designer theory. The ironic thing is that designer theory can't be taught in schools and stuff. That's another topic. If you want to watch a really good movie on that, it's called Expelled. Ben Stein, the Jewish guy from the Aflac commercials, does this documentary basically investigating the fact that scientists can't come up with conclusions that end with God, or they kind of get ostracized by the scientific community. It's a really good movie. You should check it out. But basically, to sum it up, multiverse is this theory. It's best explained kind of like a bath. Like if you have a bath of water and you kind of stir it up and you have like soap in there, it creates like these bubbles. And so the theory behind the multiverse is that our universe is just one of these bubbles. And that there's this bigger tank universe that's constantly creating these infinite amount of bubbles. The reason that they come up with this theory is because the only other possible explanation is that God created the universe. The other one is that what we'll look at next week is that our universe is actually so fine-tuned for life that the only way to explain it is that not only is there this chance possibility that something brought us into existence, but that there must be this infinite amount of universes out there, because to get to something like ours, there must be an infinite amount of possibilities to come to ours eventually, if that makes sense. So the problem with this guy I really respect. So this guy is a Christian. His name's John Lennox. He's this old English dude, super fun to watch. You should look him up. He's super. He's just my favorite dude. He's super smart, but he talks like a Christian. He doesn't talk arrogant. He's super calm. He said, it should, however, be pointed out that although Leslie may be correct in suggesting that fine-tuning means that either there is a God or a multiverse, logically these two options are not mutually exclusive. After all, parallel universes could be the work of a creator. That's kind of an interesting side note, that even if this multiverse idea is true, then that doesn't overwrite the possibility that God actually did that as well. The problem that we have, though, is that this multiverse theory isn't really based on any evidence. They've not found any evidence that there's this other multiverse. And a lot of people are starting to criticize this theory because it is just trying to evade the conclusion that there's a God. It's that people have this prior belief that there isn't a God, so they have to explain it somehow in a way where there isn't a God. Richard Swinburne said, to postulate a trillion other universes rather than one God in order to explain the orderliness of our universe seems the height of irrationality. And we'll kind of end on this here. And then we have a few questions that you guys could just discuss afterwards. David Berlinski. Again, this dude's not a Christian. He's an atheist. But he's a skeptical atheist. He's becoming very skeptical of atheism itself. He said, has anyone provided proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have our sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so as long as it's not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force of good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. That is a pretty powerful quote from a guy who is not a believer. He's basically saying that in the scientific community, they're so willing to believe in anything but God. But that science has not by far written God off at all, and that it actually seems to be pointing to the fact that there is a creator. So we'll kind of end on that. My friend actually this week, he was telling me he had this quantum physics class, and it was just the most mind-blowing class. If you guys want to blow your minds and not understand a single word that people are saying, go look up quantum physics. I can't even wrap my head around the most simple idea of quantum physics. But so my friend had this quantum physics class, and at the very last day, professor is not a Christian. You'd probably be an agnostic, not an atheist because of this quote. But he comes to the class and he says, there is no reason that we should actually be here. He said there's so many variables at the time of the Big Bang that the Big Bang should have immediately imploded on itself. The fact that we're even here, and he said, he turns to the class, he says, do you guys believe in a God? You should start thinking about it. And he's like, no one has an effing clue why we're here. And
that's heavy.
yeah, that was like the last thing he said at the class.
Yikes.
Oh, and that was, yeah, it's kind of crazy that science is actually starting to lead people into saying, wow, there might actually be something to this. The fact that there's this design about life, this fine-tuning in the universe, the Big Bang Theory, is actually pointing not to atheism, but to the fact that maybe Genesis is true. Maybe the Bible is true. From today, we can't say the Bible is true from something like that, but we could certainly say, hey, there's at least a creator. And as we kind of look at this, it'll just, I hope that you guys are just kind of getting a more well-rounded understanding. That there's not just like one argument for God. It's like, no, you start looking at science, there's evidence there. You start looking at history, there's evidence there. You start logically thinking about morality and evil and free will, and the evidence is there. And it just starts to give a clearer picture of reality. And yeah, I hope it draws you guys closer to your relationships with God. And if you're having questions, I hope you find some answers here, but I hope you guys start looking into questions yourselves and go deeper than what I could possibly go. I emailed Matt. Do you have questions there?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, you guys could kind of go through that. Yeah. Thanks for coming, guys. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Evan.
Thanks for teaching.
Evan, do you guys want to stay on and we could just talk through questions, or?
Yeah, I'll hang out.
Okay, cool.
See
All right.
See you,
See you
man.
guys later.
Cool. So yeah, I just came up with a couple questions. We'll skip the first one because we already talked about it. Or the first two, I guess. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Like the skate club kids think when they hear stuff like this? Like even just talking about the Big Bang Theory, or what do you guys think skate club kids think about science and the universe and stuff like that?
I think I can answer this one pretty well. A few of them like have actually told me they've. I think they've said, like, a few of them have said that they're not convinced because they haven't done their own research yet.
Right.
And then I know there is like a few that like I don't speak for everybody, but
Yeah,
I know
totally.
that, I think it was Nasty Bev who said this. He was like, I don't have my own evidence yet, and because like once I get that, then I'll quest out.
Right.
I think it was him, but somebody said that to me over the skate trip. Just forget who.
So I had a kid ask me. We actually ended up having a really good conversation, but at camp this summer, a kid asked me, "Do you believe the Earth is flat?" He asked me other like better questions as well. That's not a bad question either. But so I explained to him a little bit about what I believe and just the story of creation and an intellectual designer God and. But yeah, it's funny. Just the stereotype that that Christians are very closed-minded towards anything that threatens the worldview of there being a God.
Right.
And I think sometimes that's a valid point. That there's that fear of not being right or not knowing what they thought we knew. But there's also I think it's also a pretty big misconception that Christians don't value and engage with the scientific community and aren't relevant. So I couldn't give him too much because I haven't studied too much into what current scientific studies have found. But yeah, I basically said to him, no, I don't believe the Earth is flat. There's a lot of good evidence that I never have believed that. So it's kind of interesting. Just there's the stereotype, and then there's like actually having discussions and finding out what people think. He was leaning more towards all these different conspiracy theories, similar to that video we watched, the Zeitgeist.
Right. Yeah.
He would be kind of just interested in that stuff, if not subscribing to it. But
that's an interesting point too. I think there's something in us that wants the most complicated, most out there idea sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Like sometimes I think that is more attractive. Is if there's a simple explanation like God created the universe, it's like no, we want something more complicated than that. We want something more interesting, more conspiracy-like, right? Yeah.
Do you mind if I go off on that one thing that? So
go for it.
When he asked you, do you think the Earth is flat? I think a couple weeks ago or somewhere, it could have even been on the skate trip. We were talking about people who actually think the world is flat. Was that a line of religion that people think it is, or was that?
No, it's not religion. It's just there's some people who just are convinced the Earth is flat.
But they do use biblical references sometimes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That they think the Earth is flat.
Yeah.
I think back when like the Bible was still being created, I think people probably thought it was flat, or weren't even thinking that big.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's verses actually that talks about it being round. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there definitely are. But the issue is when people come to a conclusion in their minds and then just use usually twist out of context scripture to try and prove their point, which happens on both sides.
Totally.
So it's a bit tricky.
I think Liam does have a point though. Was this even on their radar? Like, were they? And I think you have a good point where I think the biblical authors, like, we care so much about science. I think they were pretty in awe of the stars and stuff, and I think they were more in awe of the stars than we are in a sense, because we don't really care that they're there, but they would like study the stars and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they actually wrote the Bible in a way where it's like they were thinking it had to be scientifically accurate to every detail. I think they had other purposes that they were thinking of.
Well, as far as like youth kids that I've interacted with, I think like the general consensus is that Christianity is conservative, and then we have a conservative view of science,
Yeah.
which
Like
brings-
young Earth and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which at least for me, that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
Young Earth.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I did too, for sure.
Yeah.
What is the young Earth idea?
So the young Earth idea is basically that. I guess maybe we should talk about this a bit.
Was that when all the continents were together as like Pangea?
No, that's Pangea. But no, the young Earth idea is that science appears. So right now, it's kind of crazy actually. I was reading about this yesterday. They can mathematically pinpoint the Big Bang to within a few minutes, scientifically, based on their current data, to 13.8 billion years ago. And they can actually go back and take pictures of what it looked like up to, I think it's 15 minutes after the Big Bang. But so young Earth creationism would say that no, and I've heard people argue it well. And if you believe in a God, I can believe in young Earth creationism. I just don't think.
There's no point to believing.
Right. Yeah.
Like
I think, like, hey, if science is supporting a theory that also supports God, I think why not go with science, right?
Mm.
And the young Earth idea would be that no, they would view the Bible as very literal in its genealogies, saying that not a single person was missed in their genealogies, and that it's only 10,000 years old. The whole Earth and universe is 10,000 years old. So they would say that God put the stars in the sky, or they would basically just ignore the fact that evidence of carbon dating and stuff like that. They would say God put stars in the sky, or stuff appears to be older. And I've heard people. I can't do it justice, but it's basically the idea that everything is only 10,000 years old rather than 18 billion
I
or
thought
13.8 billion.
humans came out at 10,000 because, like, what about like dinosaurs?
Well, there's actually, what's interesting is there's actually evidence that humans and dinosaurs walked the Earth at the same time.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've found footprints of dinosaur footprints and human footprints on the same level. That's another thing we could talk about. Well, I don't want to go too much into evolution in this series. We could brush on it, but I don't think it's necessarily the biggest topic to get hung up on. I think that is the number one thing that we get hung up on. And I think the Big Bang Theory is often associated with evolution too.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's why a lot of people shy away from the Big Bang Theory, because I think when people think about Big Bang Theory, they think Big Bang that like when we talk about atheism, where it's like this Big Bang that brought literally everything into existence, all these little explosions that eventually led to life on Earth, and then eventually evolved to humanity. The ironic thing, and we won't look into the evolution theory too much because even Christians have different stances on it. But even right now, there's a big gap in the evolutionary scale. Like there are fully formed life forms all over the place, and there's not these transitional forms that they've said there are. It's called the Cambrian explosion. Basically, if you look at the sediment of where they found these fossils, it's basically the base level. They find all these tiny little things, and then all of a sudden, fully formed vertebrates all over the place.
So the church doesn't necessarily believe in evolution.
Well, and that's the thing, is there are Christians who do believe that God could have used evolution.
Or degrees of it too.
Yeah.
I don't.
And scientifically, there's an aspect of evolution. I personally don't think there's enough evidence for macroevolution, but there are some people who say there are, but no matter what, it actually either stance, you need faith. And that's what I'd really like to start kind of us realizing, is that, you know what, we do need faith. We can only have so much evidence, and then you have to make that step and have faith in the fact that there is God and he came down as Jesus. But on the flip side, man, it takes a lot of faith to be an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And And that's what like guys like Alex Rosenberg, who he's an atheist, but he's just accepted his worldview, is trying to show other atheists, hey, like this is the end of your worldview. You want to say that there's no God, but here's what that really means. And he plays it out, and shoot, I don't really know where I was going with that, but yeah, I think it just takes a lot of faith. Like you have to have faith that everything's basically an illusion, that your consciousness itself is an illusion, that you're just matter, and that somehow you're like, it really gets really weird and funky. And it sounds weird when you talk about it until you see that there's actually a lot of scientists who are like, no, if there's no God, there's no free will. The consciousness is an illusion. Free will is an illusion. Objective moral principles are an illusion. Mm-hmm. It's really dark, and it takes a lot of faith. And that's something that we'll start to kind of see.
Yeah.
Even as we look at the two options, it's multiverse or God, and both take faith. And I would argue, I'm biased, but I would argue that the multiverse takes more faith to believe in. And because, yeah, even as atheists will describe it, they'll say, and you heard that guy, he's like, because there's fine-tuning, we have to believe there's a multiverse. Because there should be an infinite amount of universes out there. That's the only way mathematically that we should have came out. Is if there was if there was an infinite other amount of possibilities, and then finally it worked. So
Which is very improbable.
yeah. Well, and the thing is we can't even say it's improbable because it's not even near testable theory.
Yeah, it's beyond what we can.
Which, and a lot of scientists will say, like, this is not science anymore, it's metaphysics. Which metaphysics is, like, outside of physics, outside of the physical world. Whereas science, by definition, only studies the physical world. So science has its barriers. Science can only really provide the facts or the evidence.
Yeah.
And then from there, you have to kind of fit it into a story or a narrative, which they would call, or which is called metaphysics, beyond physics. And that's why Stephen Hawking was, because he's a very good scientist and mathematician. And that's why he was pretty clear in his book. He's like I'm going to propose some theories here, but it's verging on the realm of religion and metaphysics. Because of once you get to the origins of the universe, you can't really test it. There's no data that you can really replicate.
Yeah. He passed away in 2017.
Yeah, he just died. Very smart guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so next week we'll look at or not next week, I keep saying next week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Next week we'll be skating.
Yeah.
My other question was what are the implications of both the conclusions? There being a creator and the Big Bang, or chance birth through multiverse?
Well, Big Bang Theory, that's just kind of like life's pointless. Multiverse, you're kind of just on this track that your tape is just being played over and over, basically. I think that's what multiverse is, right? Because like in one universe, you did this your whole life. So in the same universe, you do that.
So, okay, now, and this is the interesting thing, is there's actually multiple multiverse theories. So one...
Slow down.
Yeah. So
I just jumped out of my head there for a second.
So yes, that would be one of the multiverse theories, is that yes, you existed in another infinite, so there's an infinite amount of universes where there's all these possibilities where you didn't exist. Then there's another infinite amount of universes where you did exist, and where you made different choices. And like, think about how many choices you make in your life, and calculate all the variables if you chose something else. It's like, and then times that by whatever, how many billions of people have lived on Earth. The number gets to infinite pretty fast. So what? Yeah. So that gets into, and that's why it's no longer science. It's like some really weird theories that are fun conspiracy things to think of.
It's fun. There's shows on that. Like one of
I
my
know, yeah.
favorite shows, Final Space. It's like this animated series, and they do all this multi-universe stuff.
But I would say the Big Bang would say that that actually proves that there is purpose to life.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about it the first week. I don't know how many were here the very first week, but we talked about how to have purpose, there actually needs to be an author to life. I gave the illustration of like a picture. And do you know Andy Steiger?
I know the name.
Okay, he's like the head of Apologetics Canada, but he taught at PLBC. And he has this illustration he uses. He was he was walking by his kid's door, and it was a picture of mom and dad and like a big X through them, a big aggressive X. And he's like, oh my goodness, like what did we do? Like, why do our kids hate us? And like, they thought the picture meant that they were mad at mom and dad. So that was their subjective idea of what the picture was. But to know the actual purpose of the picture, you can't infer that on the picture. You have to ask the author. And that's like a very simple way to put how we need purpose through an author. And so the only way to know was to ask the kids, and it ended up being, they said, oh no, that means no mom and dad when we're wrestling.
Yeah.
So it's like, so we
I
can,
like that story.
so when it comes to purpose of life, that's why atheists say, if there's no God, there is no purpose to life. Because you don't even have an author to say, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
But if there's the Big Bang, then there's an author to life. There was something that brought everything into existence that we could ask, okay, why are we here as the human race?
Yeah.
And we looked at how Jesus had an answer to that. But yeah, on the flip side, I would say the multiverse theory, and atheists would say that there is no purpose in that. There are some pretty deep implications of that theory.
Fun idea.
Yeah, which is the tension, because it's like, yeah, it is a fun idea. It's fun to think about these things. But then there's guys like Alex Rosenberg and many others. Friedrich Nietzsche was kind of the first one to do it. He was a French guy who was basically the first to say, you guys want to kill God, but here are the implications of it all. Have you guys heard of nihilism?
Yeah.
Nihilism. He was basically the kind of the founder of that. He lived a very, it basically means like no purpose to life. He lived a very kind of sad life. And was kind of the first person to be like, these are the logical conclusions of your ideas. And Alex Rosenberg is kind of a modern day Nietzsche who wrote a book saying, hey, if you guys want to propose all these theories and write God off, realize that in the end, it'll write the individual off as well. And if you guys know anything about Buddhism, it's kind of this idea that there's this oneness, this force in the world. They don't actually believe in a God. They believe almost in like everything is one spirit. And we are basically, it's called Brahman, and we are Atmans. We're like these little, it's almost like waves in the ocean. So we're part of the ocean, but we're like these waves. And atheism is almost that exact thing, where it's, but completely opposite. They would say that all physical reality is an illusion. That's Buddhism and Hinduism. All physical reality is actually an illusion.
Oh my gosh, I could not think like that.
But
oh my gosh,
atheism
yeah.
is the exact opposite, where anything that is not physical is actually an illusion.
Yeah,
Which would be yourself, which would be
not
choice,
physical.
which would be consciousness. So that's why everything eventually, it's.
I don't know which one I could choose.
And it's kind of, and that's kind of how you can be an atheist Buddhist or an atheist Hindu, because they almost believe the same thing, where it's just there's this oneness, and I'm just going back to the oneness.
I really gotta pee.
Yeah, go for it.
Just something I just wrote down. That really got to me. I just wrote it down myself. It says, I can't remember his name. The famous guy that spilt the atom said, "There's something out there. I can't explain as there is no end to the atom. It never ends." Just something I freaking wrote down. Just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's even a crazy concept, is that they haven't even found like the smallest denominator of matter either. Like they keep thinking like, oh, okay, the atom was the smallest thing. Okay, no. The proton or whatever is the smallest thing, the nucleus. It's like, okay, no, we know that's made of quarks.
Yeah.
And then now they know that quarks are actually made of even smaller things. And it's just nuts how, it's interesting because, science changes a lot and they keep discovering new things. But there's so much we don't know. And even like theories like the Big Bang Theory, as much as science is pointing to the fact that there's a God right now. Well, we could find something in the Big Bang Theory. It could be out or whatever. Science is always changing.
I was researching something online, and UBC came out with a new study that Vancouver is one of the broken cities right now. Like with people.
Brokest?
Yeah.
Vancouver.
They came out that like in September. Like it's one of the broken cities right now. There are people that are like going through like hard times. I mean, that's like I don't know if that's like a science thing, research thing, but I can't really tell with science. I'm not really good at that stuff, but I mean, I know there's proof out there. I know there's geniuses and professors that study inside of like things like I don't know what goes on around the world and stuff like that. I just thought it was pretty cool that, well, not pretty cool, but I just thought it was kind of shocking that Vancouver is like a broken city right now, because it is.
Totally, that makes sense.
And there's a lot of crisis going on in the world right now with everything happening. I think that compares it all to why that study came out last year.
What are your thoughts, Evan?
I was thinking back to what you were saying about the kids at Skate Life, and it's tough to say. Like, I've been talking to my wife a little bit about what an elevator pitch would be. Right now, I'm going to a course every Wednesday night called Skeptic. It's like the absolute worst title for a course, but going there and they talk about similar stuff that we're talking about right now, like what's the evidence of God, why evil and suffering, and they talk a little bit about curiosity and like in the adolescence and how a child or young teenagers will think that there's deeper meaning than what everybody else thinks there already is. And so they want to come up with something that is somewhat of their own. They want to have control over like how life is perceived to be, but their own thoughts. And so it's like a little bit of a rebellious attitude towards what we have come to know and believe. But I've been trying to mull my head over like how to chat with these kids about God, about what we believe, where life originated. So through this tonight, that's mainly what I've been thinking about, is how you can kind of generate more of a dialogue with these kids if they have questions and if they're willing to listen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, it's this course I've been taking is really cool. I sometimes leave with way more questions than going in. The pastor is really good, but it's a quick course. It's done in like an hour and a half. It's at Broadway Church here in Vancouver.
Norm? Is that Norm? Or
no, it's Pastor Darren.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never gone to Broadway before, but just thought that this was a really, really cool course. And And that being said, I think you said Apologetics Canada, they're coming to Abbotsford in March.
Yeah, it's every year at Northview.
Yeah.
Actually, where our skate club is.
Okay.
Yeah. Northview and Abbotsford.
Yeah, anyways, I don't know. I guess what I try to get out of these is like how to not necessarily defend Christianity, but I have a lot of friends that are atheists or they're secular or they're interested in other religions or they're curious about flat earth and conspiracy theories, and it's tough to really like start a dialogue with those guys because they're so set in their ways and they're more interested in what we don't know than what we do know. And I feel like there's so much evidence that points toward God and the creation of earth and the Big Bang Theory, that I think I'm just going through a season of trying to like consolidate all that info so that I can have some backing and feel confident in what I'm talking about. But
That's fair.
anyways, a bit of my own tangent.
No, that's cool. It's definitely hard, and I feel like because when I first became a Christian, I started like I'm just like I need to find answers for all this, and I just started reading books, like talking to people, researching stuff online. Then I would get in these debates with my friends, and they just wouldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I realized that this probably isn't the best way to do it. And I don't know. I've just found over the years there's certain people who are going to ask in a way where you know from the get-go that the conversation is going to be fruitful. But then there's people who, and you could tell usually just based on the very first question, whether they're trying to ask a question in a way to trap you or start a debate, or if they're trying to ask you a question in like sincerity to really try and investigate deeper things. Part of it will honestly be just living your life with them, and like your life is the biggest thing your life is the biggest apologetic to people is how people live their lives, and if you care and stuff like that, that'll be what earns them the ear, in my experience anyways. Obviously there are people who get won through arguments and stuff, but that's just not my forte. I found that you need to earn it through experience and time and just loving people, and then you'll earn the ear, and it'll be cool when you do. Because we've had a few skate club kids who like for years just like made fun of us and stuff, but then they hit grade 12, and then their questions went from sarcastic to genuine. But it took 5 years of being laughed at and made fun of and whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now just look at Ryan.
Yeah, we had a kid who literally, if you were like, that dude's going to become a Christian in 5 years, I would have been like, dude, he's the last person I'd want to be a Christian. We borderline weren't going to let him come on trips because he would bully kids and stuff. And like I've never felt so small by anyone. Like he would make me feel like the biggest idiot all the time. And I don't even know why, just the way he would laugh at me or make fun of me or whatever. But yeah, now he's like super solid. Went to some big discipleship training thing, sold his car so that he could go learn about God in Hawaii. Like, yeah, it was pretty nuts. And it's crazy because of that dude's life, everyone's like, what the heck happened? So now all these kids in grade 12 are starting to ask, well, maybe there actually is some validity to kind of what you guys have been talking about. But that's
got a funny sense of
humor. Oh, he definitely does, for sure. But I've heard stories of people having to walk with people for 40 years before they come to faith. And like when I became a Christian, it was literally like probably a 2-day period where just everything seemed to change. So I thought that was how it was going to be. So I came home and I just started like preaching to people pretty much, and realized like, why aren't these people just accepting this? This is the greatest thing ever. But then, like, over the years, like, I got so discouraged, and I just, like, kept moving on from person to person. And I really felt like God was challenging me to really commit to people and walk through life with them, and not just give this microwave Christianity where we drop in, preach something, and leave. Because it is great news. It is the best news. But I think there's a reason that Jesus said that what's going to convince the world is our love for one another. Paul had a pretty good way of just doing arguments, but Jesus said love was going to be the thing that convinces the world. So, yeah. Be encouraged, though, because, and the biggest thing for me was to constantly just keep thinking about these ideas, because at first they don't make sense, and it just seems like a lot of things, like, all over the place and a lot of information. And the more you think about it, the more you see them kind of create this web that's all interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
The 4 things for me that are huge is, or I guess 5. Main one is the resurrection. Evidence for the resurrection is just crazy, because there actually is, and that's what our faith is founded on. You could even make an argument that you don't even need to know any other arguments. If you know just some basic evidence or quotes by some atheists that, hey, like, there was these appearances and that the tomb's empty, then that validates everything Jesus said about all these other issues, about where we came from and our purpose in life and all that. So that's honestly the biggest one for me, is resurrection. And then from there, it's, Big Bang. We don't know how the universe got here. Human consciousness, we can't even begin to scrape that. And DNA. Those are kind of the 4 big ones for me, is resurrection, DNA, consciousness, and origin of the universe. Because those are the big question marks in science right now, among atheist Christians alike. Because when you're looking for these scientific answers, there just isn't any right now. You can't make sense of why people love and choose and all this. You have to chalk it up to illusion if there is no God. And that's kind of a hard concept to understand. I was trying to explain that to Mike, who's not here today. But understanding that if there's no God, then it leads to all these other things. It's because the best way I can put it, I was actually thinking about this today to kind of think of it in a better way. Let's say you had, picture a pool table, but it's perfect ice that has no friction. So if you hit something, it's just going to bounce forever. There's going to be nothing that stops it. And think about just a triangle of hockey pucks. And then you shoot one hockey puck into the other hockey pucks. Theoretically, in 1 billion years, you could calculate where all the hockey pucks are going to end up based on math. Obviously, you couldn't, because it would be so complex. That's basically what they've said our human consciousness is like. Is that in the beginning, there's this big bang where a hockey puck hit a hockey puck, basically, and sent all these chemical reactions happening that are continuing to happen. And eventually it led to dirt, and then somehow DNA, and then somehow life forms. But in the end, none of it is actually anything but matter and energy and chemical reactions happening. And it's kind of a bit of a hard concept to understand, but makes sense in my head. That's one I like to just. The lucky thing is that atheists don't hide it, or most atheists don't hide it. They say, no, this is the reality, is that we are basically robots, just obeying our DNA. There is no purpose to life, no objective morality, and all this. The hard thing is that when you start talking to atheists about that, they go, no, you're saying I'm a bad person? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that none of us have choice. I'm not saying an atheist can't be a good person, but I'm saying that if there's no God, none of us are good people. None of us are even choosing to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I I think the strongest arguments are philosophically, but usually those are the ones that are harder for people to kind of get their heads around and accept, because when you start thinking of the atheist worldview in a philosophical way, it doesn't make sense of anything we experience. So it's hard for people to really kind of grasp it, because deep down we all know we have choice. Deep down we all know that there's some type of morality out there that's ingrained in us, that we know that there's this right or wrong. So when you start talking about it all being an illusion, it gets kind of really weird, and people don't want to accept that. They want to kind of have this view that there is no God, but that life isn't also an illusion. And that's where you get kind of the average person, the average atheist person. It's that they don't want to accept those conclusions, or they might not have even thought about them. It could be a good way to go, but you just got to do it in a gentle way. Gentleness and respect. That's the biggest thing, is that just whenever you're talking with people, just never take anything personally. If they get heated, let them get heated, but I think as Christians, our job is to not get heated in those conversations. Anyways, it's been a while, boys.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thanks for preparing all
Thank
that.
you for preparing.
No problem. Next time we'll look at kind of the fine tuning of things, which is just starts to blow my mind.
My mind is already blown.
You're sitting there like, whoa. Yeah, it's like 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it's getting.
Oh, yeah.
If you guys want, I could open up the church for a little bit. If you guys want to escape. If you
I
guys
have
are
a bit of homework though. I have to write a script for tomorrow
all
afternoon.
good.
I was supposed to write a week ago.
Oh, that's it.
What's that
I
topic?
thought you weren't skating the church.
Yeah, we're doing
Brothers?
podcasts.
We're not
Okay.
Ben.
I have to like write.
Lying?
No, they can't, so we're not.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I'd bust down.
No, you wouldn't. It would take you over an hour to get
I
there.
got no work tomorrow.
Huh?
I don't have work tomorrow.
Oh, you don't?
I don't think so, no.
You should bus out tomorrow morning. We'll go skate.
Okay.
I actually I forgot. I have to go pick up Justice. So Justice will be with me, and we can maybe skate West 49 or something.
Sweet.
Cool.
Thanks.
Well, it was good seeing you guys. Thanks for showing up, Evan. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, boys.
See you later.
See you
See
guys.
you guys.
Yeah.
Shoot, how do I do this? Stop.
How am I gonna sleep?